Sometimes, family can be the cruelest of all. A woman stood in front of La Maison, an upscale restaurant in Boston. Elizabeth Wilson took one last look at the baby shower invitation printed on high-quality paper. Her sister Melanie's handwriting was, as always, perfect, not a single flaw, just like her life. Elizabeth, dressed in a light gray silk dress, checked her reflection in the restaurant's glass doors. Her makeup was tasteful yet understated. A simple pearl necklace gleamed quietly at her neck, a gift to herself when she opened her first restaurant 10 years ago. La Maison, located on the top floor of the Four Seasons Hotel Boston, offered a luxurious space overlooking the Beacon Hill cityscape. It perfectly balanced old Boston tradition with modern sophistication. Elizabeth understood why this place was chosen. She'd heard that her sister Melanie's husband, James Clark's investment banking clients, were regulars here. "Do you have a reservation, ma'am?" Elizabeth presented her invitation at the entrance. The Wilson Clark baby shower. The receptionist gave Elizabeth an appraising look before checking the guest list. Elizabeth fully understood the meaning behind that glance. She was probably listed as the sister who works at a pub. That was a 10-year-old lie, or rather, a story her family had fabricated on their own. Dozens of guests had already gathered in the lavishly decorated venue. Under the soft chandelier light, women in the latest designer wear chatted elegantly, champagne glasses in hand. White linen covered the tables, adorned with pastel blue flower arrangements. At the center of it all was Melanie, 7 months pregnant. Melanie looked as if she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. She wore a high-end maternity dress, with a diamond necklace from her husband James sparkling at her throat. Beside her stood their mother Carol, in perfect hair and makeup, dressed in luxury brands. They were surrounded by members of the Newton Country Club. Carol was a woman who had worked her way up as a former real estate agent. Obsessed with her social reputation, she had placed strict expectations on her daughters. At least Melanie had met those expectations. Elizabeth, on the other hand, had always been a source of disappointment in her mother's eyes. "Well, Elizabeth, you came." Her mother's voice held a hint of surprise and slight disappointment. That tone echoed words repeated countless times in Elizabeth's memories. For the past 10 years, Elizabeth had only met with them once or twice a year at family events. It was a mutual choice. Her mother and sister lived in an upscale suburban neighborhood, active in the nouveau riche social circle. Elizabeth led a quiet life downtown, at least, that's what her family believed. In reality, Elizabeth was the owner-chef of the high-end restaurant, the Hidden Gem. Located in a renovated red brick building in the Beacon Hill district, her restaurant was beloved by Harvard professors and old money families alike. However, she appeared in the media only as Chef Liz, and stayed completely off social media. The restaurant's reputation spread solely through word of mouth and gourmet magazines, with a constant 3-month waiting list. But her family knew none of this. As Elizabeth surveyed the room, she noticed place cards arranged on the tables. However, she couldn't find her name anywhere. She noticed Melanie's close friends glancing her way and whispering among themselves. They were all from the same private school as Melanie and belonged to the same country club. "Is that the sister everyone talks about? She works at a pub, right?" These comments were deliberately loud enough to be heard. Elizabeth took a deep breath and smiled gracefully. Within her heart lay a quiet confidence, matured over 10 years. Elizabeth walked slowly through the venue. The chandelier light cast dancing shadows at her feet. White tablecloths covered the tables, with pastel blue centerpieces arranged elegantly. Many of the guests were familiar faces from Newton's social scene. As she passed by, conversations would pause momentarily, then transform into whispers. Those whispers floated through the venue like a breeze. Elizabeth continued searching for her name card. 10 round tables, each seating 12. Every place had a name card made of high-quality paper. But nowhere could she find the name Elizabeth Wilson. In one corner of the venue, hotel staff were arranging finger foods. Smoked salmon canapés, caviar-topped blini, truffle-flavored quiche. Elizabeth noticed slight imperfections in each presentation. A professional's eye never rests. Elizabeth, even though you came all this way. Melanie approached. Her voice carried false familiarity. You seem to be having trouble finding your seat. Elizabeth simply smiled in response. Behind Melanie stood her husband James, sizing up Elizabeth with his investment banker's sharp gaze. We had a sudden increase in guests, you see. Melanie put on an apologetic expression. But her eyes were smiling. We had to prioritize our important guests. Elizabeth understood the meaning perfectly. She wasn't an important guest. She could never be one. But don't worry. Melanie's voice brightened as if she just had a brilliant idea. Why don't you try that dingy pub across the street? That might be more your style? Her words spread through the venue like champagne bubbles. Ripples of laughter spread from the surrounding guests. Yes, Carol approached with a smug smile. That would be perfect for you. Elizabeth took a slow, deep breath. 10 years seemed to pass in an instant. And she realized nothing had changed after all. I'll do that. She smiled gracefully. There was something mysterious in her expression. Enjoy your baby shower. Elizabeth left the venue with perfect posture and elegance. Her luxury brand heels clicked quietly against the marble floor. Behind her, her mother and sister laughed triumphantly as new gossip began circulating among the guests. In the hallway, Elizabeth paused by a window. Boston's cityscape glowed in the evening light. Among the buildings, she could see where her restaurant, the Hidden Gem, stood. Melanie and her mother watched Elizabeth's silhouette through the window. Backlit by the setting sun, she radiated an almost divine dignity. Yet to her mother and sister, she appeared as nothing more than a pathetic loser. Elizabeth started walking toward the elevator. Her steps were a bit lighter than usual. Because she knew the time for truth to be revealed was steadily approaching. After retrieving her jacket from the front desk, Elizabeth left the hotel and crossed the street. Her mother and sister watched with satisfied smiles. However, they didn't yet know that their satisfaction wouldn't last long. As Elizabeth walked toward the pub across the street, she took out her mobile phone. The screen displayed a message from Michelin inspectors, announcing their upcoming visit to her restaurant. A graceful smile played across Elizabeth's lips. 1 week after the baby shower, Carol was reading the Boston Globe over breakfast as usual. There was a large headline, "The Hidden Gem, Boston's Culinary Treasure." Next to beautiful photographs of the food was the name Chef Liz. James, look at this article. Melanie peered over her husband's shoulder. The hidden gem, isn't that the impossible to book restaurant? The article continued with a detailed introduction to the restaurant. It described how the renovated red brick building in Beacon Hill housed an exclusive space of just 20 seats, decorated with crystal chandeliers and antique furniture. Even Harvard's president is a regular. James remarked, impressed. The executives at our bank have been trying to get reservations too. But there's usually a 3-month wait. Carol read the article carefully. Chef Liz had opened this restaurant 10 years ago, quietly but steadily building her reputation with innovative cuisine influenced by her training in France. She had earned 2 Michelin stars and was aiming even higher. Should we try going? Melanie suggested. It's such a famous restaurant right in our neighborhood. However, making a reservation proved far from easy. They were told they needed a letter of recommendation, and even then, the recommender had to be a customer approved by the restaurant. How pretentious. Carol muttered in displeasure. The fact that even they, as nouveau riche, couldn't easily access this restaurant wounded their pride. That afternoon, Carol was shopping in the Beacon Hill area when she happened to pass by the hidden gem. The old building softly received the afternoon sunlight. The interior was impossible to see from outside. There, she witnessed an unexpected sight. Elizabeth stepped out of a luxury car that had stopped in front of the restaurant. Though dressed in her usual simple style, her bearing carried an unfamiliar dignity. Behind Elizabeth came a renowned artist Carol had seen on television. To her surprise, the artist was speaking to Elizabeth with the familiarity of an old friend. Elizabeth, thank you for another amazing meal. I was moved again today. The honor is mine, thank you for coming. Carol stopped in her tracks upon hearing this exchange. Elizabeth's voice carried a confidence and composure she'd never heard before. From inside the restaurant, staff members emerged one after another, bowing deeply to Elizabeth. Their attitude wasn't that of mere colleagues. It was the behavior shown to a respected leader. Chef, regarding today's Michelin inspector visit. A man who appeared to be the sous chef approached Elizabeth and spoke quietly. Yes, proceed as usual. Elizabeth's response was remarkably calm. Carol watched intently from behind the building. There was no trace of the Elizabeth she knew, that shameful existence, who worked at a pub. Upon returning home, Carol immediately called Melanie. I saw something unbelievable today. Melanie listened, confused by her mother's excited voice. I saw Elizabeth going into the hidden gem. And she seemed like a regular there, or even more than that. No way. Melanie's voice trembled. They desperately tried to recall past events. Elizabeth's reserved attitude, her deliberate absence from social circles, and her deep knowledge of cuisine. Fragmentary memories were slowly beginning to make sense. That night, Melanie and James began researching more about the hidden gem. The restaurant's website only briefly listed Chef Liz's background, with no photographs. However, gourmet magazines and review sites were overflowing with praise for the restaurant. Melanie found an old gourmet magazine interview. It says Chef Liz trained at a 3 Michelin-starred restaurant in France until 10 years ago. 10 years ago. James pondered. That's when Elizabeth suddenly started distancing herself from the family. Melanie opened the baby shower photos on her smartphone. There was a photo of Elizabeth's back as she left the venue. Looking at it now, it wasn't the posture of a defeated person at all. Rather, it was full of composure and confidence. Could we have? Melanie's voice was swallowed by the darkness of the room. The next morning, Carol returned to the hidden gem, this time during early morning preparation. Delivery trucks were bringing in premium ingredients one after another. Among them, Elizabeth could be seen carefully inspecting each ingredient. Elizabeth, dressed in a white chef's coat, looked like a different person from the daughter Carol knew. The staff followed her instructions efficiently. There was an unwavering trust built over 10 years. Carol felt her chest tighten. The daughter she had despised as a pub employee was actually a renowned chef respected by everyone. And they hadn't noticed this fact for 10 years. The truth was revealed 2 weeks after the baby shower. Taste of Boston, the leading gourmet magazine in Boston, ran a special feature on the Hidden Gem's 10th anniversary. Elizabeth's photograph was prominently displayed on the cover. She stood in the kitchen with a dignified expression, wearing a white chef's coat. The headline, "The True Face of Chef Liz, the Truth Behind the 2 Michelin Star Hidden Gem," shone beside the photo. Melanie happened to pick up the magazine in a hospital waiting room. When she saw her sister's photo, she nearly collapsed. After graduating from Boston University 10 years ago, Elizabeth Wilson trained at prestigious restaurants in France. Upon returning to the U.S., she immediately opened the Hidden Gem. As the beloved protégé of legendary chef Jean-Pierre Dubois. The article detailed Elizabeth's brilliant career. Her training period in France, her experience at 3 Michelin-starred restaurants, and her entrepreneurship after returning home. Everything had been perfectly planned. The cuisine of Chef Liz, aka Elizabeth Wilson, is creative, combining classic French techniques with modern arrangements. Her signature dish, Landscape of Memories, beautifully expresses French traditions while using New England ingredients. Melanie was so absorbed in the article that she forgot about her prenatal checkup. There was a side of her sister she had never known. Elizabeth was acclaimed by global gastronomes. The Hidden Gem is consistently booked 3 months in advance. However, this isn't merely about popularity. Elizabeth Wilson maintains a policy of welcoming only guests who truly understand value. Reservations require letters of recommendation from existing customers. This strict attitude reflects her sincere approach to cuisine. After finishing the article, Melanie immediately called her mother. But Carol had already seen the article. She sat in her living room, trembling as she read it over and over. Elizabeth Wilson's restaurant isn't just a place for fine dining. It's an intersection of art and culture. Harvard professors, artists, writers, they all love this place as their hideaway. The article ended with a quote from Elizabeth. In cuisine, what matters isn't superficial decoration, but essential value. And I want to share that joy only with those who can understand it. Those words seemed like a quiet protest against her family. That evening, James attended an executive meeting at his investment bank. An unusual expression of anxiety showed on his face in the conference room. Is it true that the Hidden Gem's owner chef is your sister-in-law? The chairman asked with a smirk. We've been trying to get a reservation for over 6 months without success. Couldn't you do something through your family connection? James struggled to respond. Having previously explained that his sister-in-law worked at a pub, he couldn't now acknowledge the truth. I apologize. I'm not familiar with the details. The conference room was filled with a heavy atmosphere. The bank executives' gazes pierced James. Many of them knew that obtaining a reservation at the Hidden Gem had become a status symbol. That night, Carol and Melanie met in front of the Hidden Gem. Warm light spilled from the restaurant's windows. Inside the full restaurant, upper-class guests were enjoying an elegant evening with Elizabeth's cuisine. What have we done? Melanie's voice trembled. That day, telling her to go to a pub. Carol was overwhelmed with intense regret as she recalled her past behavior. She had judged her daughter based on superficial values, without trying to understand her. And most ironically, Elizabeth had already established a firm position in the upper-class society they so desperately aspired to join. The next morning, Carol gathered her courage and called the Hidden Gem. When she tried to make a reservation, she received the usual polite response. She was told a letter of recommendation was required. I'm sorry. I am Elizabeth Wilson's mother. Carol's voice trembled. A moment of silence on the other end. Please wait while I check with the chef. A few minutes later, the call resumed. We apologize, but the chef has requested that you follow the normal reservation procedure. At that moment, Carol understood everything. 10 years of contempt and scorn. She was overwhelmed by the consequences of continuously judging her daughter based on superficial values. Melanie felt the same way. Despite being less than a month from her due date, she visited the Hidden Gem almost daily. All she could do was watch from afar as the aroma of cooking wafted out and satisfied customers came and went. One day, Melanie gathered her courage and entered the restaurant. But Elizabeth was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the sous chef politely but firmly told her, "We apologize, but we are fully booked today. Reservations require a letter of recommendation from existing customers." Just then, Elizabeth emerged from the kitchen. The sisters' eyes met. Elizabeth looked at Melanie with a calm expression, as if looking at a stranger. "Do you have a letter of recommendation, ma'am?" Those words weighed heavier than 10 years of revenge. Melanie fled the restaurant in tears. From a distance, she could see the line of luxury cars at the Hidden Gem. Ironically, the symbol of the world they aspired to was in her sister's hands. Meanwhile, Elizabeth continued creating perfect dishes as usual. In her heart, there was no longer anger or hatred. Only quiet resignation remained toward her family who couldn't understand true value. A few days later, Carol and Melanie found an envelope in their mailbox. A letter written in Elizabeth's beautiful handwriting on high-quality paper. When opened, it contained a short message. True value lies not in superficial decoration, but in essence. If you are ready to understand that. A month after receiving Elizabeth's letter, Melanie gave birth to a baby girl. A bouquet arrived at the hospital room. The card simply said "Congratulations," but Elizabeth's handwriting was unmistakable. The bouquet from the Hidden Gem was different from the other lavish flower arrangements in the hospital room. The simple arrangement, incorporating seasonal wildflowers, had a gentle kindness that soothed the heart of anyone who saw it. It seemed to express Elizabeth's cuisine itself. "Mom." Melanie spoke to her mother while holding her newborn. What should we do? Carol silently gazed out the window. She had already called several times trying to get a reservation at the Hidden Gem. But each time, she received only polite refusals. Then one day, another letter arrived from Elizabeth. If you truly want to understand, why don't you try working at the restaurant? Starting from the bottom. To understand essence, one must begin with the basics. The proposal came as a thunderbolt to Carol and Melanie. Their nouveau riche pride urged immediate rejection. However, they had no other options now. 3 months after giving birth, Melanie stood in the Hidden Gem's kitchen for the first time. Not in a pristine white chef's coat, but in a dishwasher's apron. Carol also started working weekends as a dining room assistant. The first few weeks were hell. Melanie's hands grew rough from unfamiliar hard work, and Carol's feet ached like poles. However, Elizabeth showed them no special consideration. Things of value take time to understand. That was all Elizabeth said. But as time passed, they gradually began to change. While washing dishes, Melanie started to feel the passion put into each of Elizabeth's dishes. Carol began to understand the true meaning of hospitality as she watched customers' delighted faces. After 6 months, Melanie had her first chance to taste Elizabeth's cooking. It was during a staff tasting session after a meeting. This taste. Tears rolled down Melanie's cheeks. 10 years of her sister's feelings were contained in that dish. A year passed, and Carol was formally hired as dining room staff while Melanie became an apprentice cook. Their attitudes and values had changed remarkably. The glamour of their former social circle no longer attracted them. Instead, they developed eyes that could recognize true value. Carol began attending psychological counseling to confront her past values. Melanie learned cooking basics from scratch, developing a sincere approach to her work. One night after closing, Elizabeth called them both over. Starting tomorrow, shall we meet as family? Carol and Melanie choked up at these words. It meant more than mere forgiveness. It marked the beginning of a new bond between people who understood essential value. The following Sunday, the Hidden Gem welcomed a special morning. Though normally open only for dinner, the restaurant opened that day for Carol, Melanie, and the 18-month-old baby. Elizabeth prepared a special brunch for her family. It was a series of dishes without fancy decoration but filled with deep love. The wildflowers on the table held the same simple kindness as the bouquet that had arrived at the hospital that day. This is my true feeling, Elizabeth said as she brought out a dish. I'm proud that you've learned to see essence rather than appearance. Outside the window, Boston's streets were bathed in morning light. The red brick walls of the Hidden Gem quietly watched over this new family story. It was the dawn of a new beginning, earned by understanding true value.